The shove was careless, all shoulder. No balance. The kind of move made by someone who had never been corrected. I felt it before I heard the laughter. Whiskey tipped, glass rattled, and soaked into the bar mat like a quiet spill no one wanted to acknowledge. The room went still, not dramatic, not loud. Just the kind of silence that comes when people sense a mistake but do not yet understand its weight. The recruit did not recognize me. That was expected. What he did not expect was that I did not move. I did not curse. I did not reach for rank, witnesses, or backup. I just turned and looked at him. Calm, measured. The way you look at terrain before deciding how to cross it. He mistook that stillness for weakness. He was 19 years old in his confidence and reckless with it. He had no idea who I was or what I had learned about keeping people alive. By sunrise, I would be responsible for his survival in a place that punished mistakes with bodies. And the only reason he would make it home was because I chose discipline over ego. Subscribe to my channel, Lady Veteran Stories, for more real military stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I was stationed that year at a remote coastal installation tucked outside a working fishing town called North Briar Point. It was the kind of place most people drove past without noticing. Weather-beaten docks, 2 diners, 1 blinking traffic light that never seemed to change on time. The base itself sat just far enough inland to avoid attention, pressed between low forest and open water. It was 2013. I was there quietly, no uniform, no insignia, no announcement. On paper, I did not exist. To everyone on that base, I was just another civilian passing through. That was intentional. The readiness evaluation I was conducting only worked if no one knew they were being evaluated. My name is Rear Admiral Laura Whitaker. By then, I had spent more than 30 years in the Navy. Most of those years were not spent behind desks. Before flag rank, I had commanded teams where clarity mattered more than confidence, and hesitation carried a cost measured in blood. I had learned early that leadership was not volume, it was responsibility. And responsibility rarely announced itself. That night at the bar was not downtime. It was data collection. Places like that bar attract the truth. Men loosen their discipline. Stories grow louder. Accountability gets blurred. When people think no one important is watching, they show you exactly who they are and how they behave when authority feels absent. The bar itself was nothing special. Low ceiling, scarred wood, old flags on the walls that had faded into decoration instead of meaning. It was where Echo Platoon gathered when training cycles paused long enough for breath. That was where I first noticed the recruit who shoved me. His name was Cole Mercer. He was new to the unit, recently transferred, physically impressive. Broad shoulders, fast reflexes. The kind of presence that fills space before earning it. He laughed loud, spoke over others, treated the room like it owed him something. I had seen his type before. Cole belonged to Echo Platoon, a group with a strong operational record and a growing problem. They had survived difficult rotations together. They trusted one another in the field. But somewhere along the way, that trust had started turning into arrogance. Men who survive together sometimes begin to believe survival is proof of superiority instead of luck, teamwork, and discipline. I watched how they talked about missions, how they framed mistakes, how often responsibility drifted away from decisions and landed on circumstances instead. Weather, intel, someone else's call. Cole pushed harder than the others. He challenged without listening. He equated dominance with leadership, and when he shoved me at the bar, it was not personal. It was habitual. He had learned that the world moved when he applied force. What he had not learned yet was restraint. I did not correct him there. Correction requires context, and context was coming whether he wanted it or not. Later that night, Movement orders were issued for the following morning. A training aircraft had gone down in the wooded hills east of the installation. No confirmed survivors. Sensitive equipment on board. Recovery mission. Straightforward on paper. I watched the platoon as the news moved through them. Some sobered up quickly. Some cracked jokes to bleed off nerves. Cole brushed it off like another drill. That reaction mattered. Simple missions are where discipline erodes. People rush. People assume. People die because nothing was supposed to go wrong. As I left the bar, I did not look back at Cole. I did not need to. I already knew the measure of him. What I did not know yet was whether he would learn before the environment forced the lesson itself. By morning, uniforms would replace civilian clothes. Noise would be replaced by wind. And the mountains outside North Briar Point would decide who belonged there and who did not. And whether Cole Mercer understood it or not, his life was already tied to my decisions. The warning signs did not arrive all at once. They never do. They came quietly, threaded through ordinary moments that only looked harmless if you were not trained to notice patterns. Conversations drifted from coordination into competition. Stories from past rotations shifted tone, moving responsibility away from choices and toward excuses. Weather. Bad intel. Someone else's call. Cole Mercer spoke the most. He always had a story ready, always positioned himself at the center of it. He needed to be seen. He needed to win every room before anyone asked what winning actually meant. The others let him. Not because they agreed, but because challenging him required effort, and no one wanted friction on a quiet night. That kind of silence is expensive later. When the orders came down close to midnight, the mood changed. A dawn movement. Timbered hills east of base. Recovery of sensitive equipment from a downed training aircraft. No confirmed survivors. No clear cause of the crash yet. I watched how each person received the information. Some leaned forward without realizing it. Shoulders tightening. Eyes narrowing as their minds shifted into preparation. Some cracked jokes, the kind meant to bleed off tension without disrespecting it. Those reactions were familiar and manageable. Cole's reaction was different. He leaned back, smiled, dismissed the briefing with a shrug like it was a formality standing between him and breakfast. He spoke about speed, about how quickly they could be in and out, about how the terrain would not slow them if they pushed hard enough. He did not ask about contingencies. He did not ask about weather windows. He did not ask about communications failure points. Confidence without curiosity is a liability. The weather reports were thin. Coastal systems moving inland unpredictably. Fog expected to thicken by mid-morning. Winds shifting through the valleys. Nothing dramatic enough to cancel a mission. Just enough to complicate it if someone ignored the signs. Communications were already showing strain. Repeater coverage in the hills was inconsistent. Batteries had been swapped too many times. Temporary fixes layered over older fixes. On paper, the mission was simple. Recover equipment. Secure the site. Return before conditions worsened. Simple missions are where people get hurt. They invite shortcuts. They encourage assumptions. They convince people that discipline can be relaxed because the objective looks small. I had buried good operators because someone believed simple meant safe. As we prepared to move, I paid attention to how Cole interacted with the team. He pushed for pace over spacing. He interrupted quiet planning with louder certainty. He framed caution as hesitation. I adjusted what I could without exposing myself. I asked questions instead of giving answers. Questions forced people to think without feeling challenged. Some responded. Cole rolled his eyes. That told me everything I needed to know about how he handled authority when it was subtle. We stepped off just before first light. The air carried that damp stillness that settles before fog thickens. The kind of quiet where sound travels farther than it should. Boots sank slightly into soft ground as the tree line swallowed us. Cole took point early. He moved fast. Too fast. His confidence translated into speed, not awareness. I watched him miss small details, broken branches, fresh scuffs in the mud that did not belong to us. He was focused on proving something. I was focused on keeping people alive. As we climbed higher, the forest tightened. Visibility narrowed. Radios crackled, then fell silent in pockets. The kind of silence that tests patience? I felt the shift before anyone said it out loud. That tightening in the chest that comes when conditions begin stacking instead of spacing themselves out. Weather closing. Communications thinning. Terrain funneling movement. Cole did not feel it yet, or he did and refused to acknowledge it. He pushed harder, calling for speed with the confidence of someone who had not paid the price for being wrong before. I slowed the unit with hand signals. Adjusted spacing. Let terrain dictate pace instead of ego. Some followed immediately. Cole hesitated, then complied with visible irritation. That hesitation mattered. Leadership under pressure is not about who speaks the loudest. It is about who adapts first. The environment does not care about rank, confidence, or reputation. It responds only to awareness. By the time the fog thickened enough to erase the ridgeline behind us, the mission had already shifted. It was no longer just recovery. It was assessment, risk management, discipline under constraint. Cole still thought it was a race. I knew better. And somewhere ahead of us, hidden by timber and silence, the mountain was already preparing the lesson he had refused to learn the easy way. By mid-morning, the fog finished what the coastline had started. It swallowed the ridgeline behind us and closed the world down to a narrow tunnel of wet branches, dark trunks, and sound that carried farther than it should have. The kind of visibility that turns simple movement into risk and forces every decision to matter more than planned. That was when the captain went down. It was sudden. No warning. One moment he was stepping over a fallen log, the next he was on his knees, gasping, fingers clawing at his chest like his body had turned on him without permission. Training took over before panic could. Someone knelt. Someone secured his airway. Someone called it in over a radio that crackled and cut out halfway through the transmission. Rank evaporated in seconds. In environments like that, authority only exists if someone can carry it forward. Titles do not stabilize a situation. Leadership does. And leadership does not always come from the person who expects it to. Cole reacted first, but not well. He saw delay as danger. He always did. He pushed for speed, for movement, for keeping momentum before the fog closed tighter. He spoke in clipped commands, louder than necessary, like volume alone could hold the unit together. I wanted spacing. I wanted silence. I did not raise my voice. I did not counter him directly. Direct conflict fractures teams when pressure is already high. Instead, I adjusted positions. I slowed the outer elements. I asked questions that required answers instead of opinions. How far was our last confirmed position? What coverage did we actually have on the slope? What was our fallback if communications dropped completely? Some of them answered without hesitation. Those were the ones still thinking. Cole bristled. He took the questions as challenges instead of safeguards. That distinction matters. The captain was evacuated downslope with 2 escorts. That left us lighter and more exposed. The fog thickened as if it sensed weakness. Moisture settled on gear and crept into gloves. Breath fogged lenses. We pressed on, but slower. Carefully, the mountain answered before we finished adapting. Ice cracked under a boot, 2 positions ahead of me. A sharp, unmistakable sound that does not belong in forests unless something is about to go wrong. The man froze. Good instinct. Too late. Sound does not need permission once it is released. Somewhere ahead of us, movement answered back. not wildlife, not wind, deliberate, controlled, local militia. They were not supposed to be there, not officially. But unofficial never stops people who know the land better than maps ever will. We had crossed into a space where training assumptions no longer applied. This was no longer a recovery exercise. Cole reacted the way people do when plans collapse. He wanted to assert control. He started issuing commands without confirming positions. His urgency began outrunning his awareness. I shifted beside him and placed a hand on his arm. Not forceful, not gentle. Grounding. Stop talking. Listen. He looked at me like I had overstepped. He did not recognize authority unless it wore insignia or shouted. But the team listened anyway. They trusted stillness more than noise. We held. The fog worked in our favor now, if we respected it. Sound carried both ways. Visibility was mutual. Movement had to be deliberate or not at all. I guided the team into tighter spacing without compressing them. Enough distance to absorb contact. Enough closeness to communicate with hand signals alone. Cole followed reluctantly. Each adjustment felt like a personal loss to him. Shots were not fired, but they did not need to be. The presence alone was enough to sharpen consequences. Mistakes would not be corrected with paperwork out there. The militia moved laterally, probing, testing. They were not aggressive, but they were curious. Curious people with weapons are dangerous. Cole wanted to push through, to end the uncertainty by forcing an outcome. That is how people get surrounded. I waited. Time stretched. Muscles burned from holding positions too long. Cold seeped in. Radios whispered and died. We became smaller, quieter, harder to track. Eventually, the movement ahead drifted away. The mountain released us, not because we won, but because we did not give it a reason to punish us further. Cole exhaled like he had been holding his breath the entire time. He looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time I saw doubt replace certainty. This was not training. This was not about speed. It was about survival. And the lesson had only begun. The crossing looked stable until it wasn't. The ground narrowed into a slick spine of rock glazed with ice and wet pine needles. Water moved beneath it, shallow but fast, cutting a thin channel that forced single file. Cole took it first. He always did. He stepped with confidence instead of caution, weight forward, eyes up instead of down. His boot slid. It was not dramatic, no flailing. Just a sudden loss of purchase and a sharp intake of breath that carried farther than it should have. The sound snapped through the fog like a signal flare. Cole caught himself on one knee, hand slapping rock, gear scraping. I saw the movement uphill before he did. A shift in shadow, a barrel-cutting fog at an angle that did not belong to the forest. The rifle appeared the way threats always do when you are already behind the moment. Quiet. Patient. A man who had been watching us longer than we had been watching ourselves. Cole was still focused on his footing. I did not shout. I did not warn him. Warnings take time. I fired once. The recoil was familiar. Controlled. The kind of movement that lives in muscle memory long after names and dates fade. The report was swallowed by fog and terrain, but the result was immediate. The figure uphill collapsed backward into the brush, rifle clattering against rock before disappearing into silence. I did not look at Cole. I checked sectors. Doe, bright. Right. Rear. I raised my hand and closed the unit down into cover positions. Voices stayed low. Movements were precise. Lives do not pause for realizations, and neither does the environment. The crossing was still exposed. The fog still shifted. The mountain still listened. Only after angles were covered did I step closer to Cole. He was frozen where he knelt, eyes wide, breath shallow, the reality catching up to him in pieces instead of all at once. He had not seen the rifle. He had not heard the shot the way he should have. Shot dulls sound before it dulls thought. I put a hand on his shoulder and applied pressure. Grounding. Move. He moved, slowly at first. Then, with intention, we cleared the crossing and folded back into the trees, the unit reforming without a word spoken louder than necessary. No one celebrated, no one spoke. This was not victory. It was avoidance of loss. Once we were set, I took the rifleman's position into account. Angle. Distance. Timing. He had been waiting for someone to make a mistake. Cole had almost given him one. Almost. I issued quiet adjustments, shifted our route, changed elevation to avoid predictable lines. The militia did not press. They did not need to. They had learned what they needed to know about us. Cole stayed close after that, not crowding, not clinging, just attentive in a way he had not been before. He followed hand signals without hesitation. His movement softened, became deliberate. Confidence drained out of him, replaced by awareness. That change mattered. When we paused again under cover, I finally looked at him. His face had lost color. His jaw worked like he was trying to speak but knew better. I did not explain what happened. I did not need to. He understood enough. Something in him had cracked open. Not ego. Ego breaks loudly. This was something quieter. Understanding. That moment became the center of everything that followed. Not because of the shot. Not because of the man who did not get back up. Violence is only the surface of these stories. What matters is what it costs to avoid it, and who bears that cost without being asked. I had saved him because it was my responsibility. Because leadership does not get to choose when it acts. Because the job is to keep people alive even when they make it harder than it needs to be. Deserving never enters the calculation. As we moved on, the fog thinned slightly, enough to remind us how narrow our margin still was. The mountain had taken its payment and moved on, for now. Cole walked differently after that. Not slower, smarter. Each step measured, each pause intentional. He checked behind him without being told. He watched terrain instead of chasing momentum. I did not correct him. I did not praise him. Growth does not need commentary. The bar felt very far away then. The shove. The laughter. The laughter. The assumptions. All of it belonged to another version of him, one that did not exist anymore. Out there, stripped of noise and bravado, Cole Mercer finally understood what discipline was for, not control. Not dominance, survival. After the crossing, the mountain stopped feeling like an obstacle and started behaving like a presence, not hostile, not forgiving. Just there, watching every decision and responding without emotion. That is, when you learn whether a team understands restraint or only talks about it. We used terrain instead of force. The slope broke into natural folds that hid movement if you respected them. We moved along contour lines instead of straight climbs. We let wind carry our noise when it rose and froze when it dropped away. Breath slowed. Steps shortened. The unit learned the rhythm quickly once fear sharpened attention. Speed stopped being the goal. Survival replaced it. Leadership is not volume. It is alignment. And alignment shows itself in small things. The way people match pace without being told. The way heads turn together when something shifts. The way hands rise in response to a signal before the brain finishes naming it. The unit adjusted. Posturing faded. No one tried to outpace anyone else. No one spoke unless it mattered. The fog thinned in places, then thickened again. But by then, we were moving like something smaller and harder to notice. A shape that did not invite contact. Cole changed more than the others. He stopped volunteering for point. He accepted rear coverage when assigned without comment. He checked angles before moving instead of after. The loud certainty drained out of him, replaced by a quiet attentiveness that told me the lesson had landed. For the first time, he followed without needing to prove anything. That kind of following is not weakness, it is trust. And trust under pressure is worth more than confidence ever will be. We advanced in measured segments, pausing to listen. Not just for movement, but for absence. Absence of birds. Absence of wind. Absence of the small noises that tell you the world is behaving normally. When those go missing, something else has taken their place. Once, the wind shifted wrong. We froze. A shape moved downslope, too controlled to be accidental. We waited it out, letting time do the work. Impatience usually ruins. After several minutes, the movement passed without noticing us. No one spoke. The unit understood now that silence was not empty. It was active. It was something you held, not something that happened by accident. Communications failed completely not long after. Radios went dead in sequence, like lights clicking off in a hallway. No panic. Hand signals carried us forward. Prearranged spacing kept us connected without clustering. This was the difference between training and competence. Training teaches actions. Competence teaches restraint. Cole stayed close enough to receive signals, but far enough not to compromise spacing. He mirrored movement without anticipation. He waited for direction instead of assuming it. That mattered. When people stop trying to lead prematurely, leadership becomes possible. By early afternoon, we reached a position where terrain gave us options. A narrow draw leading toward the recovery site, flanked by rock faces that would amplify sound and restrict movement if handled poorly. We waited. Time stretched again. Muscles complained. Cold settled deeper. No one shifted without reason. I watched faces. Fatigue changes people. It strips away performance and leaves truth. What I saw was steadiness. Quiet discipline. The kind that cannot be faked for long. Cole caught my eye once. Just once. There was no apology there. No request for approval. Just acknowledgement. He understood what had happened at the crossing and what it had cost to prevent it. That was enough. We moved through the draw when wind rose again, masking our passage. Each step placed with care. Each pause respected. The mountain allowed it because we respected it back. No shots were fired. No commands were shouted. Force was available, but it was not needed. That is the mark of control. Not the ability to dominate a situation, but the discipline to move through it without leaving damage behind. By the time we cleared the draw, the unit was no longer a collection of individuals. It was a single, quiet intention moving through hostile ground without announcing itself. Cole was part of that now, not because he had been corrected publicly, not because he had been humbled, but because he had learned something harder. That survival is not earned by noise, and leadership is not claimed. It is granted by those who stay alive because of it. We reached the recovery site as daylight thinned into something brittle and pale. Dusk settled in without ceremony, draining color from the forest and flattening depth until distance became guesswork. The aircraft wreckage lay scattered along a narrow slope, broken by impact and half swallowed by undergrowth. Nothing burned, nothing dramatic announced itself. It was just there, waiting, the way consequences often are. We secured the perimeter first. Quietly, methodically. No one rushed. The discipline held. Cold settled into fingers as we worked. Gloves came off for dexterity and never quite warmed again. Metal resisted touch. Equipment had to be handled carefully, documented, wrapped, and prepared for extraction. Every step followed procedure, not because it was written, but because it protected people who would never know our names. No casualties. No heroics, just the work. Faces were drawn by the time we finished. Breathing showed white in the air. Shoulders sagged under packs that felt heavier than they had that morning. Fatigue stripped away anything left that was unnecessary. What remained was cooperation. On the return movement, the forest changed again. Night crept in unevenly, pooling in low ground and stretching shadows where fog still clung. We moved slower now, but not because of fear. Because tired people make mistakes if they rush. Cole fell back into step beside me, without comment. He did not apologize. He did not explain. He just carried his weight. That told me more than words ever could. He adjusted spacing when I signaled, took rear security when assigned, passed equipment forward when someone else needed relief. The loudness that had defined him before never resurfaced. He had learned where energy belonged and where it did not. There was a moment on the return when the terrain forced us into a narrow pass between rock and drop-off. Wind funneled through it, sharp and cold. One man stumbled, caught himself, kept moving. No commentary followed. The unit flowed around the problem and absorbed it. That is what competence looks like. The militia never reappeared. Either they lost interest or decided the cost was no longer worth the effort. Sometimes restraint changes the equation more effectively than force ever could. As we cleared the tree line closer to base, exhaustion settled in deeper, the kind that makes the last mile feel longer than the first 10. But morale held steady. Quiet pride does not need celebration. Cole stayed beside me until the lights of the installation finally came into view through the thinning fog. He looked at them for a long moment, then back to the path ahead. Whatever he had expected from that day, it was not what he received. Some lessons land with noise. This one did not. It came through silence, through cold hands, through the knowledge that he had survived not because he was strong or fast or loud, but because someone else had been disciplined enough to act when he could not. I did not remind him of the bar. I did not need to. That version of the night belonged to someone else now. By the time we stepped back onto gravel and out of the trees, Cole Mercer was no longer trying to prove anything. He had been tested in a place that did not care about reputation, and he had learned what mattered. Some lessons land quietly. We crossed back onto base just after full dark, the kind of dark that flattens sound and makes artificial light feel harsh and intrusive. The gates opened without ceremony, no applause, no relief briefings waiting. Just tired people moving through familiar ground with unfamiliar weight still clinging to them. The truth did not surface immediately. It never does. First came the routine: weapons cleared, equipment logged, medical checks that asked the same quiet questions everyone already knew the answers to. Hands shook slightly as adrenaline drained away. No one spoke more than necessary. Cole stayed close but said nothing. His posture was different now. Shoulders squared without tension, head up without defiance. He followed procedure carefully, like someone aware that details matter more when eyes are no longer on the horizon. The reveal came later, in a small briefing room that smelled faintly of old coffee and disinfectant. The captain had been stabilized and evacuated. Command presence returned, but it was subdued. I was asked to step forward. I gave my name, then my rank: Rear Admiral Laura Whitaker. The room changed instantly, not dramatically, not loudly, just a collective recalibration as people replayed the last 12 hours through a different lens. Conversations stopped mid-thought, eyes dropped, then lifted again with new understanding. Cole froze. He snapped to attention so fast it looked like instinct finally finding the right shape. His face drained of color. For a brief second, it looked like the ground might open and take him with it. He stared straight ahead, jaw tight, breath controlled but shallow. I did not enjoy that moment. Authority revealed too late often feels like a trap, even when it is not meant to be. Consequences followed. They always do. There was documentation. Statements written while memory was still sharp. The shove at the bar was included. So was everything that followed it, not as punishment, but as record. The military runs on records because memories fade and lessons cannot afford to. Cole was counseled. Directly, professionally, without cruelty. He was made to explain his choices. Not justify them, explain them. That distinction matters. Responsibility was assigned where it belonged. Not all of it landed on him. It rarely does. Culture enables behavior long before individuals act on it. Echo Platoon had allowed noise to masquerade as confidence. That, too, was addressed. Cole listened. He did not interrupt. He did not defend himself. He acknowledged where he failed and where others compensated for him. That mattered more than any apology could have. His future remained intact, not because he had been protected, but because growth had occurred under pressure. Discipline had replaced noise. Awareness had replaced bravado. The system is not meant to discard people at the first failure. It is meant to correct them before failure becomes habit. I watched Cole carefully during those conversations. He did not look for my reaction. He did not angle for forgiveness. He accepted what was said and adjusted accordingly. That told me the lesson had stuck. Not everyone changes when corrected. Some just become quieter versions of the same problem. Cole was different. He had been confronted by consequence in a place where consequence was immediate and unforgiving. That kind of education leaves marks that paperwork never can. After the room cleared, Cole remained. He stood where he was until dismissed. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. He thanked me, not for saving his life, for showing him what discipline actually looked like. I nodded. That was enough. Leadership does not require gratitude. It requires continuity. The ability to pass lessons forward without turning them into stories about yourself. Later that night, as I packed to leave the installation, I thought about how close the day had come to ending differently, how easily confidence can tip into cost, and how often women in the military are tested before being trusted, forced to demonstrate authority without ever announcing it. Cole would remember that day, not because of my rank, but because he had learned that survival is a collective effort and discipline is not about control. It is about responsibility. I left North Briar Point the same way I arrived, quietly. No farewell formation, no speeches, just a vehicle pulling away from a base that would continue operating exactly as it should, with or without me. That is how most real leadership ends. Not with recognition, but with continuity. What stayed with me was not the shove at the bar or the brief embarrassment of being underestimated. Those moments are common enough to fade. What stayed with me was how quickly discipline, once chosen, changed everything. How restraint, applied at the right moment, kept people alive who might never fully understand how close they came to loss. Women in the military learn this early. We are often tested before we are trusted, watched more closely, questioned more quietly, expected to prove authority without ever announcing it. That pressure can harden you, or it can refine you. Over time, you learn which one keeps people alive. Cole would move on to other units, other missions, other moments where confidence would be tempted to outrun judgment. I hoped he would remember the mountain instead of the bar, the silence instead of the noise, the fact that survival did not come from speed or volume, but from alignment and restraint. Power does not announce itself. Authority does not shout. And strength does not need witnesses. Those lessons are not written into manuals. They are carried forward by people who learn them the hard way and choose to pass them on intact. Subscribe to my channel, Lady Veteran Stories, for more real military stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from.